Why is rent so expensive in Canada? And how does your city stack up against the rest of Canada? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Greg Pierce. I am a local real estate agent and investor based in Halifax, Nova Scotia on the east coast of Canada. And I'm here to talk to you today about the CMHC rental market report that just came out. Even if you're not from Halifax, stay tuned until the end. I will be highlighting all the major cities across Canada for vacancy rates and how much rent is charged for the average 2-bedroom unit. Before we dive into Halifax and get to all the major cities across Canada, let's look at Canada as a whole. So in 2023, vacancy rates across Canada averaged out to be 1.5%. That means of all the available rental units, only 1.5% were vacant or available for new tenants to move in. On the flip side, the average rent for a 2-bedroom apartment, which is the common factor that's used across the board when looking at average rents across Canada, was at $1,359. Now, it is important to note that this data does come from Statistics Canada, so it is very reputable. Having said that, there are going to be exceptions because a lot of times small investors that may only own a couple of units are going to be excluded from this report, as it primarily focuses on the large corporations that own large multi-unit buildings. So here in the Halifax CMA in 2023, the vacancy rate was only 1%. That's 0.5% lower than the national average. And this is the third year in a row that Halifax has been at the 1% vacancy rate. It's also been under 2% since 2017. This is extremely low and creates a lot of demand issues when looking at the rental housing market. And how we come to this figure is something that we're going to be diving into a little bit more in this video. The number one factor for vacancy right now is the fact that our population is growing at such a fast rate. Last year, we grew by 3.2%, which was the highest, fastest growth year over year in Nova Scotia history. Now, while non-permanent residents and immigrants were the largest contributor to this growth, we also had large net interprovincial migration, meaning more people were coming from other provinces compared to people leaving Nova Scotia, and that contributed to the overall growth that we saw last year. Another key factor for the low vacancy rate is the fact that there is very little turnover in terms of renters moving on to home ownership because of all the challenges faced with high housing prices coupled with high interest rates. This can be correlated to the fact that we saw 20% lower volume of sales here in the Halifax CMA last year, which obviously means that there isn't a large contingent of first-time homebuyers or maybe people that were renting previously moving into that home ownership field. Now, these stats are actually from July 2022 to June 2023. However, we saw 2,842 completions for the rental market last year. But the fact that we still see ourselves at 1% vacancy is just a testament to how popular Halifax and Nova Scotia as a whole has become and how quickly our population is growing. These completion figures for the rental housing market should continue to stay high because of a number of government incentives, including HST and GST rebates on rental construction. However, the largest obstacle for getting these projects completed is the labor shortage in the construction industry. In 2023 in Nova Scotia, the construction trade labor shortage in Nova Scotia was 8%, which is well above any other industry. Needless to say, this is a huge hurdle for getting these projects completed in a timely fashion so that we can start to see higher vacancy rates, which should impact the overall rent market, which we will get to now. Now, as mentioned, the average rent for a 2-bedroom unit in Canada was $1,389. Here in the Halifax CMA is $1,628 for the average 2-bedroom unit. That is a growth of 11% year over year comparing 2022 to 2023 here in Halifax. Now, clearly there is a direct correlation between vacancy rates and average rent because when there's very little supply, people are willing to pay more money, and that's true on the rental side as well as the home ownership side. Now, while this might be a bit of a hot take and something that is commonly disputed and argued about here locally, is the fact that landlords have taken on a number of increased costs over the last couple of years, including things like property taxes and insurance. And unfortunately, that cost gets passed on to the renters. Now, this isn't always a fair way of operating things, but at the end of the day, these landlords and large corporations are running businesses. And unfortunately, that often does get passed on to the consumer. Now, if you listen to any financial guru out there, they will often tell you that you should not spend more than 30% of your income on housing, whether that's through a mortgage or rent. And there's only 2.4% of the rents here in the Halifax area that were below that 30% threshold. So obviously the vast majority of people are overextended right now, and that is creating the housing shortage and really the sad situation that we find ourselves here in Halifax and in many parts of the country. Now, as promised, we are going to get to the vacancy rates and average rents for all the major markets here in Canada. But if you don't mind taking a second to like this video, if you've gotten any amazing information out of this, click the subscribe button so you can get more content like this, and tap that notification icon so you can be informed anytime I release new content. All right, so starting from the west and moving east, we had Vancouver at 0.9% vacancy, and their rent was $2,181 for a 2-bedroom apartment. Then looking at Edmonton, their vacancy was significantly higher at 2.4%, and their average rate was $1,398 for a 2-bedroom apartment. Then looking at Calgary, 1.4% vacancy rate and $1,695 for average rent. Winnipeg, 1.8% vacancy, $1,427. Toronto, 1.5% vacancy, $1,940 for rent. Ottawa was at 2.1% vacancy, $1,698. And then Montreal had a 1.5% vacancy and only $1,096 for an average 2-bed unit. That number really blew me away. Montreal is a phenomenal city and seems like a great place to live. So looks like I might need to pack up my bags and move to Montreal. All jokes aside, I am staying here. You know I love Halifax, but I hope this information was helpful for you to see what the rental market looks like across Canada and a deeper dive into Halifax and some of the challenges that we're faced here, not only with the rental side, but the home ownership side. As always, thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next one.